It began with a night the American government would never forget. A quiet briefing room in Washington, dim lights, exhausted officers, and a single message on the table. The report came from Britain. It described something that sounded impossible, something that American intelligence believed could not exist. A projectile had struck London with no warning. No aircraft, no engine noise, no chance to respond. It had fallen out of the sky faster than sound and landed before anyone heard it coming. For a few seconds, the room was silent as American analysts read the message again. They needed to make sure they understood what they were seeing. The weapon had been launched from the European mainland, crossed the English Channel, climbed into near space, and then descended at extraordinary speed. To the officers gathered in Washington, it meant one thing. Germany had created a weapon that could ignore every traditional defense system. For the first time, range was no longer limited by aircraft fuel, pilot endurance, or naval reach. Germany had entered a new era of warfare, and the United States suddenly felt exposed in a way it had never imagined. Before this moment, Americans believed the Atlantic Ocean protected them. It was a barrier wider than any other, a stretch of water so large that it shaped the country's entire worldview. Armies could not cross it without fleets. Aircraft could not cross it at all. For more than a century, American defense planning relied on the idea that distance guaranteed safety. Even as the Second World War intensified, many leaders believed the homeland was out of reach. The war was overseas. America was the factory, the supplier, the arsenal. It was not the battlefield. But when the V-2 struck London for the first time, everything changed. The American officers in the room stared at the photographs sent from Britain. Buildings torn open, streets scattered with debris, a crater where moments earlier people had been going about their lives. They studied the angles, the blast radius, the entry path. Nothing matched any known artillery or bomb. The reports explained that the weapon had struck without warning, that no one saw or heard it coming until the moment of impact. It defied everything the Americans understood about warfare. Then a quiet voice in the room said the words that shifted the entire atmosphere. If they can build this, what stops them from building a bigger one? That was the moment the old belief in oceanic safety began to collapse. To understand how shocking this was, it's important to see how the United States viewed Germany before this night. American analysts knew Germany had a powerful army, but armies moved slowly. They knew Germany had a capable navy, but submarines were tools of harassment, not of reaching cities. They knew Germany had advanced aircraft, but none could cross the Atlantic. And they knew Germany had scientists, but they assumed long-range weapons were still fantasy. The V-2 proved they were wrong. As the briefing continued, new documents surfaced from British intelligence. They showed German scientists had been developing long-range rockets in secret for years. They showed test results that American engineers struggled to believe. They showed diagrams that hinted at designs far larger and more ambitious than the V-2. The British had intercepted references to a long-range system known as the A9/A10, a rocket concept meant to go far beyond London. Its intended destination was the eastern seaboard of the United States. Its unofficial name was the New York rocket. The Americans reading the report felt a kind of cold shock they had never experienced. It wasn't just a threat on paper. Germany had already demonstrated the technology in real combat. If they could scale the V-2 even partially, the consequences for American cities would be unthinkable. And this rocket wasn't the only threat emerging from Germany. Months before the V-2 struck London, analysts had intercepted information about a German project known as the America Bomber. At first, American officials dismissed it as impossible. No aircraft could fly from Europe to New York and return. But German engineers were working on prototypes for gigantic long-range aircraft with extended fuel capacity, lightweight design, and wingspans larger than anything in service. Some designs were meant to be one-way missions. They didn't need to return. Their purpose was to strike a symbolic blow to show that Germany could reach across the ocean. American intelligence had seen these plans before, but the V2 gave them a new meaning. If Germany could leap forward in rocket technology, why wouldn't they push the limits of aircraft as well? Suddenly, everything seemed possible. As the night continued, the room filled with more reports. New German submarine models capable of longer travel, experiments with submarine-launched missiles, research into early jet technology, even discussions about giant transatlantic gliders. Not all of it was realistic. Some of it was exaggerated, but the Americans could no longer ignore any of it. The V2 had proved that German ambitions could not be casually dismissed. There was a moment near the end of the briefing when the officers sat quietly, overwhelmed by the reality unfolding before them. One man pointed to a map of the Atlantic, tracing a straight line from the European coast to New York. It looked impossibly far, but so had the idea of a rocket hitting London from hundreds of kilometers away. He said almost to himself, "The ocean isn't enough anymore." That sentence captured the shift taking place. For the first time in its history, the United States faced a world in which distance did not guarantee safety. The old assumptions had shattered. Technology had changed the nature of war forever. In the days that followed, the American government reacted with urgency. Research funding exploded overnight. New defense systems were developed, radar networks along the East Coast were expanded. Factories producing aircraft, ships, and engines went into non-stop production. Engineers were given full support to accelerate the development of long-range American rockets. Naval forces increased patrols across the Atlantic, using new sonar equipment to track submarines. Air defense drills were introduced in major cities. What terrified American planners most was that Germany's progress had occurred while fighting on multiple fronts and suffering heavy losses. If Germany had so little left, yet still managed to deploy something like the V2, what could they have achieved if the war had tilted slightly more in their favor? The thought was unsettling. As Allied forces pushed deeper into Europe later in the war, they began capturing German research centers. What they found there confirmed the fears from that night. Massive rocket designs, prototypes for long-range aircraft, incomplete missile parts, fuel experiments, research notes about intercontinental launch systems. Some of the projects were unfinished or impractical, but they demonstrated one undeniable truth. Germany had been planning to challenge the United States across the Atlantic. The V2 had only been the beginning. The discoveries made after the war showed that German engineers were attempting to build weapons generations ahead of their time. Some ideas looked similar to early space launch vehicles. Others resembled cruise missiles. The America bomber plans were real, with wind tunnel tests and factory schematics. Even the A9/A10 concept, though unfinished, represented a genuine attempt to create a rocket capable of crossing the ocean. When American analysts reviewed these findings, they realized how close the world had come to entering an entirely new type of warfare. If the conflict had lasted longer, or if Germany had not faced shortages of fuel and materials, the global balance of power could have shifted dramatically. The United States might have faced direct strikes on its own soil. But the reason these weapons never reached America was not because the ideas were impossible. It was because Germany ran out of time, resources, and territory. Allied bombing disrupted research sites, supply lines collapsed, scientists were forced to relocate repeatedly. As the front lines moved closer to Germany, the projects that once seemed unstoppable began to fall apart. Still, the threat had been real, and the panic from that single night influenced American strategy long after the war ended. It changed how America thought about national security. It convinced leaders that oceans were no longer barriers. It pushed the United States into developing its own long-range missiles, early warning systems, and air defense networks. It even influenced Cold War planning. Everything that came afterward, satellites, missile shields, intercontinental aircraft, had roots in that moment. But the emotional core of this story always returns to the same scene. That dark room in Washington, the first time American officials saw the photographs and reports describing a weapon that no one expected. a weapon that marked the beginning of a new age. At the end of that meeting, after hours of debate and disbelief, an American general stood up from his chair. He looked at the others, all exhausted, all shaken, and he summed up what everyone was thinking. "The oceans can't save us anymore." That was the night America realized Germany could reach New York. The night the country understood that distance was disappearing. The night the world entered a new era where technology could leap across continents, and no nation was beyond reach.